SENDIASS. Oh, recording in progress. And just to reassure everyone, what I will do is I'll do a presentation about SEN appeals. And then at the end of that, we'll stop the recording and you can ask additional questions as well. So if you do want to talk in a little bit more detail, but you don't want to do it on the recording, that's absolutely fine. There will be space at the end to do that as well. I am going to try to share my screens. Sarah, when I share my screens, I'm not going to be able to see you at all. So you're just going to need to shout at me if there are questions. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see if we can do this.
Looking
Right.
good.
Can you see?
Yeah, looking good.
Excellent. I am going to start, and please do pop your questions into the chat. Sarah's going to shout to interrupt me. Actually, Sarah, I've managed to get a little picture of you in the top corner of my screen, so I might be able to see you if you make a noise as well. So yeah, hi everyone. I am going to try to talk for no more than half an hour on this. It is a really wide topic, so dip in and out. If you're watching this as a recording, fast forward it to the bits that are relevant. I've tried to head up the slides so that you can quickly whiz to the one that's relevant if you're watching the recording. As I said, my name's Gail. I'm the service manager for Hampshire SENDIASS. For those of you that aren't aware, SENDIASS and HPCN have been running quite a few webinars like this over the last 18 months or so. So you can go back and look at other topics that are on our YouTube channel or HPCN's YouTube channel. And we try to address topics that are useful for you. So if there is something else you want us to talk about, let your HPCN rep know or drop us an email, and we always try to set our webinars based on what you want to hear. I think our next two webinars are going to be annual reviews for children who are year 9 and older, and what to do if your child is in a placement that you think is inappropriate for them. So I think that is going to be March and April's two topics. So yeah, I'm going to spend the first section running through this workshop, and it is going to look like this. I can get my slides to move on my screen. Lovely. So I'm going to talk about when you can lodge an appeal. I'm going to talk about what you could do before lodging your appeal, perhaps to resolve the issues that you might be having, the types of appeal that you can lodge, how to submit your appeal, so the actual nuts and bolts of what to do with the paperwork, what happens between when you send in a request for an appeal and the actual hearing, and what happens in that tribunal hearing. So fast forward to the bit that's relevant if you're watching this on catch up. Okay, so when can you lodge an appeal? You can lodge an appeal at any time when a statutory decision is made. So a statutory decision is yes or no to make an assessment for an education, health and care plan, yes or no to issue an education, health and care plan, or when the plan is issued, either at the point of final plan or after an annual review has happened, you can appeal the contents of the plan. So what the local authority decided to put in the plan. That can include the contents as in what it says your child should receive. It also can include the placement, which is section I. If you have a decision to cease your child's plan, you can appeal that. And following an annual review, if the decision is to maintain the plan as it is, but you want changes to be made, you can appeal that. So in a decision outcome from an annual review, you can appeal, whether that is cease, maintain, or change. Any subsequent plan, final plan that's issued following an annual review, you also have a right to appeal. So it's basically any point at which the local authority makes a decision, a statutory decision that affects your child. You can lodge your appeal within 2 months of receiving your decision letter from the local authority, or within 1 month of receiving your mediation certificate, whichever date is later. And I'm going to talk about mediation a little bit later on. Before lodging your appeal, have a chat to your caseworker. It's in everyone's best interest to try and avoid going to tribunal because it takes a long time. It's really stressful. There's loads of paperwork involved. I know I'm not selling it. It's not a particularly easy process. So see if you can, before you lodge an appeal, speak informally to your caseworker if you can get hold of them. Find out why the decision's been made and talk to your school if your child is attending school and find out if they agree with the decision that's been made or if they think that an error has been made. And while those conversations might not resolve all of the issues, you might be able to get movement on the things that are most important to you. And even if that doesn't happen, you should still end up more informed about why the local authority has taken a decision. So it will help you to frame your appeal if you're able to get a response from them on why they've made a decision. Unless you're appealing only section I, which is the placement in your plan, then you have to consider mediation before you lodge your appeal. If you're only appealing section I, you can go straight to appeal. But if you want to appeal any other things about the plan or any other decisions, so yes or no to assess, yes or no to issue a plan, you need to seek advice from mediation. Through that process, you would explain, you would talk to a mediation advisor and they would explain the mediation process and whether or not it might be of value to you. You can think about whether or not that might be of value to you or whether you'd prefer to go straight to appeal. Mediation, if you decide to do it, is free. And if you choose to mediate, the mediation company would arrange a meeting within 30 days with the local authority. And at that meeting, you have the opportunity to say why you disagree with the decision the local authority's made, and the local authority will have to respond formally to say why they've made the decision. You can also say what you think they should have done instead, and in some cases they will agree to take action. So for instance, if you think they haven't carried out an assessment that should have been done and that would have made a difference to your child's plan, you can raise that at mediation and they will often agree to then do that assessment or make some changes to the plan. After the mediation meeting, you're issued with a certificate, which then you can use to lodge your appeal. And although mediation doesn't always remove the need for appeal, it can be really helpful in moving things forwards and reducing the number of issues that need to be resolved at tribunal. So it can make the appeal smaller and more manageable.
Now, can I just check? I think I'm right in saying when you get the final copy of your EHCP, in that letter, it lays all that out for you. It lays out your options about appeal and mediation and how you go forward if you want to take one of those.
Yes,
you don't need to know it or find it from somewhere else.
No, you don't need to find it from somewhere else. Your decision letter should include contact details for the SENDIASS service and the mediation service and your right to appeal. Okay. So Sarah, I am going to drop into the chat, if I can manage to do this, a link to all of the appeal forms.
Okay, it'll drop to me and then I'll share it.
Okay, let me see if I can manage. Okay, so I've just dropped those into the chat and Sarah can share them. So these are the different types of appeal that you might be looking to lodge. So refusal to assess. By default, and for maximum efficiency, the tribunal will always hear refusal to assess appeals on the paperwork alone. So to be successful in a refusal to assess appeal, you need to show that your child has or may have special educational needs, which may need to be met in accordance with a plan. So you need some sort of evidence that shows that your child might have special educational needs, and it is a different appeal form. It's the only appeal that goes on a different appeal form, and it's called SEND 35A. So that will go into the chat once Sarah sends it on. Other types of appeals all go into the form that's called SEND 35. So you might have a refusal to issue an education, health and care plan. The decision to issue a plan should always be based on the evidence that the local authority collected during its assessment, whether that's an initial assessment or a reassessment following an annual review. So to be successful in your appeal about refusal to issue, you would need to be confident that you've got evidence within some professional assessments about your child that the local authority has failed to take into account, or you would need to be able to show that their local authority failed to arrange some specific professional assessments which would have given evidence that your child needed a plan, or that perhaps you've provided some independent professional assessments that the local authority hasn't taken into account. So those tend to be the reasons that a refusal to issue a plan appeal would be successful. In terms of appeals against the educational content of the plan, we're talking about appeals against Section B, which is where it says what your child's needs are, Section F, which is where it says the provision that should meet your child's needs, and Section I, which is the placement within the plan. And this is either at the point when the plan is finalised or following an annual review. So if you are thinking about appealing Section B, you need to look really closely at that section where your child's needs are described. You need to refer back to professional reports, and anything that's in a professional report that describes a need that your child has should be in Section B of the plan. And if it isn't there, you should be successful in appealing to have it added. Section F, there should be at least one provision in Section F for every need that's in Section B. So if Section B says Johnny is unable to use language at a level for his age group, then there should be a provision in section F which includes speech and language therapy, for instance, something that will help address a need that was identified in section B. Often the local authority plans from Hampshire are laid out to show that, so they often read with the need followed by the provision and then the next need followed by the provision. That's a recent change in Hampshire, which is actually relatively helpful in terms of going through and checking whether you have something in section F for each need in section B. That's provision in section F has to be specified and quantified. It can't say Johnny needs access to speech and language therapy, full stop. It has to say Johnny needs to have speech and language therapy for 30 minutes twice a week from a teaching assistant following a plan laid out by a speech and language therapist. For instance, it has to be really specific. It has to say who, it has to say how often, and it has to say who, when, or who with, depending on whether it's a small group or on their own. If you're looking at a section I appeal, which is the placement, the name of the school that's been named on your plan, you might want to only appeal section I, and that is fine. You can lodge a section I appeal only, but you have to be really confident that sections B and F are accurate, because the local authority is duty bound to place your child in a school that can meet their needs. So they need to refer to section B and section F in determining the correct placement. If section B and F are insufficient, then the local authority may well place a child in a school that can't meet their needs. So when people call us at SENDIASS, and say, I need to appeal the placement, we would always say, are you confident that section B and section I are a complete description of your child's needs and the provision to meet those needs? If you're appealing against section I and you know which school you want your child to attend, you need to make that clear at the point when you make the appeal. If you're not sure at the point that you lodge the appeal which school you want your child to attend, because maybe the right assessments haven't been done and you don't feel informed enough to make that decision, that's something that you need to continually work on through the appeal, because by the time you come to hearing, the judge can't pick a school out of thin air. They need to name in accordance with your wishes as a parent, or in accordance with the local authority's recommendation if you don't name a school by the time the hearing comes around, or if you don't reach a conclusion that says we need education other than at school and you have a good reason for that. If you're just still not sure, you will be a little bit stuck by the time you get to the final hearing. You can also appeal the health and social care elements of the education, health and care plan. So those are found in sections C and D of the plan. That's where they describe the medical or the health needs and the social care needs, C and D. And then section G is the provision to meet the health needs, and section H, 1 and 2 are the provision to meet the social care needs. You can only appeal the health and social care content of a plan if you are also appealing an educational element. You cannot raise a health and social care content appeal on its own. So you've got to find something in sections B, F and I that you're also appealing. The SEND Tribunal has the power to make recommendations about health and social care provisions, but not orders. So with the education sections, it can order the local authority to make a change. With the health and social care sections, it can only recommend changes. But although those recommendations are non-binding, they're being made by a specialist tribunal and they shouldn't be ignored or rejected without careful consideration. So any reasons for not following the recommendations have to be set out in writing and given to you by the local authority.
Can I pop a question in there, Gail?
Yeah, you absolutely can.
So, does the final EHCP draft have to be signed off by all parties prior to the local authority sending it to the future secondary schools for them to then allocate the preferred schools?
Does the say again?
Does the EHCP have to be signed off by all parties? So I guess parents, local authority,
No.
and current setting? No.
So they have to consult on a draft because they can't finalize. So they have to, when they finalize the plan, they have to name a school in it. So they have to do the consultations before the finalized plan. So that is a failing in the system. It's not the local authority's fault. It's a failure of the law. The local authority have to consult based on their draft plan. So if you're not happy with the draft plan, often we see schools saying, no, we can't meet that child's needs based on the draft plan, and the parents saying that's because the plan is 5 years out of date. And it's in draft. If we had all the up-to-date information in the plan, then this school would think differently. And often parents are successful in contacting the school, giving their side of the story, and the school will say, well, actually, if that was what the plan said, we could meet needs. And so they lodge an appeal on the basis of sections B and F because they're not up to date, and I, and they get an agreement from the school that they could meet need if these changes were made. And those are often successful in appeal.
Yeah, I'd not thought of it like that before, but that is crazy, isn't it? That people are making a decision based on the draft.
It is, yeah. Well, it assumes that the drafting process is done to everyone's satisfaction.
But otherwise, we'd just add another step, wouldn't we? And
yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, whoever's question that was. So submitting your appeal. So I am not going to look at the whole appeal form because we don't have that long, but the appeal form has 12 sections, and all of the sections apart from section 3 are basically what's your name, what's your child's name, tick box which section of the appeal are you appealing, do you want a paper hearing, what needs do you have in terms of accessibility needs if you were to go to a hearing. There's a checklist of documents that you must include, so that's a really helpful, that's in section 10. If anyone's got questions about other sections, I'm happy to take them at the end, but I'm only going to look at section 3 just now because this is the one where you say the reasons for your appeal, and the bullet point list that you can see on the screen are the actual questions, the boxes on the appeal form. So the appeal format says, I'm bringing the appeal because, and you need to be as full and clear as possible in that section about the reasons that you want the issues that you want the local authority to make decisions on. So I'm bringing this appeal because I'm not satisfied with the decisions made and because of these reasons. I disagree with the description of special educational needs, section B, because. So you fill that in if you're appealing section B, and it may well be often section B appeals are because an old report has been used and a new one hasn't been done, or you've asked for an assessment to be done and it hasn't been done. So you can say that in section B. Section F, I disagree with the specification. So if you're appealing section F, that can be because a report wasn't done, we're therefore also missing some provision in section F. It might also be, it says things like, my child must have access to such and such, or opportunities for such and such, which is not specifically quantified and specified. So you can say that's not quantified and specified throughout this bit of section 3. Anytime you're giving the reason that you want to lodge the appeal, if you're referring to evidence, you should reference it. So you should say, in section F, page such and such, it says, quote, have opportunities to access such and such, and this is not specific and quantified. And if there's a report already in existence that does specify and quantify, then you say the educational psychologist report of 2021, page 4 says James must have small group social activities for 30 minutes twice a week in a group of no more than 4 children. So if that evidence exists and it just hasn't been included, you also reference that in this section of the appeal form. The 4th section is the local authority have not considered. You can raise things like distance to school if you're appealing the section, and the fact that perhaps your child has a medical condition that means that they're not able to complete a journey of over a certain amount of time, or they have not considered that you've got 3 other children to get to a school and they've named a mainstream local setting that you would have to transport your child to themselves. Anything like that can go in there, and you can reiterate the points from the earlier boxes. I disagree with the local authority's choice of school, college, or institution because, and that might be it's an inappropriate peer group. My child needs to, if you think your child needs to attend a special school, you can't just write, well, you can just write my child needs to attend a special school, but it doesn't help the tribunal service understand your point of view. So my child needs to attend a special setting because it will provide a smaller group environment, or a peer group of similar academic ability, or a peer group of similar social skill needs. So you need to say why you disagree with their choice of setting, and why in the next box you prefer your setting. If you haven't yet worked out which school you want your child to go to, you can describe the type of setting in there. So you can say, we haven't been able to identify a school yet because we need more evidence, but we believe that our child would need a special setting with a small group of this number of children of a similar academic ability or a similar social skill group in there. Use that as an opportunity to describe. Okay, so between the submission and the hearing date, and this is probably the most important bit of the appeal. It's not the actual hearing itself. It's what happens in between when you lodge your appeal and when you have your tribunal hearing. Within 10 days, you'll receive a confirmation email from SENDIASS. SENDIASS is the name of the tribunal. It's the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Tribunal Service. And at that point, the local authority will be made aware that you've lodged an appeal against them. The email that you get from SENDIASS will include your hearing date, and it will include an explanation of the tribunal process, and it will give you a list of dates on which action needs to be taken by yourself and the local authority. Write those dates on a calendar, because you really need to know those and you really need to meet those dates. And I'll explain the sort of thing that you have to do on those dates in a moment. After that point, when you've had that response from SENDIASS, any other correspondence or paperwork about the appeal, you have to send to both the local authority and the tribunal service. You have to copy them both in on those emails. You can't just have sort of off the book conversations. 30 days after lodging your appeal, the local authority have to give a written response, and that should include a summary of the facts as they see them, and it might be very brief, and it will set out their arguments. Sometimes that response can make quite hard reading because it's usually very brief and very to the point, and you may well not agree with the things that are written there, but it's their opportunity to explain why they made the decision that they made, and it gives you a really good idea of where their arguments are going to come from. Throughout the appeal process, you can and you should keep seeking meetings with the local authority to try and resolve issues around the case. If you did mediation, it's often those meetings are a continuation of things that happened in mediation. So the local authority might have agreed to do an assessment, but they haven't finished it yet. So you've lodged your appeal, but during the course of the time between when you lodge the appeal and the hearing date, hopefully that assessment is completed. It gives rise to more evidence and advice, which can then be included in sections B and F. And it's often the case that a lot of sections of the appeal can be resolved ahead of the hearing date. Often not all of them, but often quite a lot can be resolved ahead of the hearing date. If you do manage to fully resolve your appeal with the local authority, which does sometimes happen, and everyone's happy, then you can jointly request a consent order from the judge, and the judge will order that the agreement that has been reached is the order made by the court, and you then don't need to go to the final hearing. During the course of time between ending in your appeal and the hearing date, you can at any point request telephone case management hearing, TCMH. The purpose of a telephone case management hearing is to seek guidance and get clarity from a judge, and it can be really helpful if things get stuck or confused. So this route is particularly helpful if the appeal is about a lack of evidence and you think the local authority have failed to carry out some assessments. So you can request a telephone case management hearing and say to the judge, my daughter's last educational psychologist assessment was 3 years ago and it's out of date, and the local authority are still relying on it and they won't make another one. And the judge will usually then say to the local authority, if they feel it's reasonable, yes, you have to make that assessment, and they give them a date by which it has to be made by. We also often have parents with quite a lot of evidence from their child's school that their child is perhaps wearing headphones, sitting under the desk, using fiddle toys a lot, lots and lots of evidence that the child has some sensory needs, but the local authority is saying, no, we won't do an occupational therapy sensory assessment. And often those parents are successful through telephone case management hearing in explaining to the judge that they think it's reasonable for that assessment to be done, and the judge ordering that assessment to be done so that it can be taken into account in the hearing. The one thing to bear in mind is that the later in the process that you have that telephone case management hearing and get that decision, that will sometimes lead to the hearing date being pushed back, because if that happens just a few weeks before the hearing date was going to be, the judge has to offer time for that assessment to take place and then for it to be taken into account. So sometimes it can lead to the date being pushed back 4 or 6 weeks. But if you do it early on, that shouldn't be the case. Forms and evidence. So this is all the paperwork, and a lot of these you will get the dates from in your original letter. So you will need to submit an attendance form. So the initial response from the tribunal will give you the date that you have to submit the attendance form by. And that's the form you use to tell the tribunal service who will be attending. So you can have a family member appear with you in the hearing. It'll be a virtual hearing, so you can have them appear with you in the hearing. If you have a solicitor instructed, you have to list them on your attendance form, although usually they will do the attendance form. If SENDIASS are helping you, you would list us on the attendance form. And if your child is able to attend, list them on the attendance form, even if they're only going to come for 2 minutes to pop on the screen and say hi to the judge. It can be really powerful to have the child attend, even to say hello to the panel and the judge. So by all means, list them if you think that they're going to be able to make an appearance of any kind. You also include on that form anyone who you want to attend as a witness. Make sure before you list a witness that the person actually can make the date and is willing to attend as a witness, because the judge will get really cross if you list people who then don't show up. But it can be really helpful to have a witness. And in particular, in my experience, the witnesses that are really powerful tend to be people like classroom teachers or the person who works every day with your child, because you can get so much from a 1-hour assessment with a professional who says maybe your child does have some sensory needs. But during the hearing, if the judge is able to ask that class teacher, so what actually does happen when the fire bell goes off, what does Elizabeth do? Can you give me an example of a time when that's happened? And they can give a really rich description of how your child's responded and the sort of help that they needed to cope in that situation, or just to cope with being in a busy classroom. That can be really powerful. So if you can get a classroom teacher or someone who knows your child very well to agree to be a witness, then I would say absolutely do. Your witness has to be there to expand on things that are not captured within the reports. You wouldn't ask a witness to come. So for instance, a psychologist who'd written a report and met your child once, because anything that they would say would be contained in the report anyway. It has to be someone who's going to expand on the evidence. You will have an evidence deadline in your original response from the SENDIASS tribunal. That's the point at which you should have submitted all of your evidence. So when you first lodge the appeal, you send as much evidence as you have at the beginning, and then any further information that you get from school, any further assessments that take place, you send them on before the final evidence deadline. It's really important that if it's a Section I appeal and you're asking for an independent setting, that you submit as part of your evidence a prospectus from the school that you're asking to be named, a letter from the school that confirms that your child has a place at that school, if that school is named by the judge, and the full costs of that placement. So you only need to do that where it's an independent setting, but it's really important that that's there, because the judge can't take into account the cost to the local authority, and the judge also has no power to name an independent school unless the independent school has already consented to offer a place. You have to have that letter offering a place. The rules are different for maintained schools, so state schools. The other thing, and probably the most important thing, that should go back and forth right from the point at which you lodge the appeal is called the working document. And that's really important if you're challenging sections B and F, or if you're challenging any health and social care elements. So the caseworker who was originally attached to your case should send you a working document, and you should be able to put on there any changes that you want to the plan and reference the evidence for those changes, and that should go back to the local authority. They should accept some, make some comments. It should come back to you. That should be a document that goes back, a working document, that's what it's called, that goes back and forth up until 10 working days before the hearing, and then it should be submitted to the judge. And the aim is that that final working document has reduced all of the number of things that need to be agreed to just 1 or 2 points by the time it goes to final hearing. We know at the moment that the local authority are really struggling to participate in that working document process because of their capacity at the moment and the pressure on their service. And that's a real shame, because it means that loads of things are getting all the way to final hearing. And then when finally you get a chance to discuss them, they're just getting agreed anyway. And it's a really stressful process for you as parents. So if you can get a caseworker to engage in that back and forth with a working document, you will find that you get an awful lot resolved before you get to final hearing, sometimes to the point that you're able to seek a consent order, but often to the point that it's just a small amount that needs to be done on the day. The other document you need to know about is the request for changes document. So you use that for anything that you need to change after you've sent the documents in. So if you submit your attendance form and then you realise that you've got a witness you want to add, you submit a request for changes. If you've appealed section I and then you get some advice and think, oh, I need to expand and include sections B and F, you do a request for changes. If there's any additional evidence or late evidence, you do it on a request for changes. And if you make a request for changes, you always have to seek the local authority's response. Do they agree to the request for changes or not before you send it in? Even if they say no, you can still send it in as a request for changes, but you have to seek their response first. If you don't get a response from them within a reasonable amount of time, you can also submit the request for changes saying, I asked for a response on this date and didn't receive one by this date, so I'm submitting it anyway. So a JDAR, Judicial Alternative Dispute Resolution Process, this is something the tribunal can decide to do. So they can decide to list certain types of cases, usually those which involve section I and not very much else, for a JDAR. And that, if it happens, will be done 1 week after the final evidence date and 2 weeks before the final hearing date. So in that window, a JDAR lasts about an hour and a half, and the purpose is to try and support the parties to resolve the dispute by agreement. And it might be possible in that meeting for the judge to provide a view on whether or not either party is being unrealistic in respect of the evidence. So if you've provided lots and lots of evidence and the local authority is still saying, look, you've provided loads of evidence for a special school and it's overwhelming, the local authority for whatever reason is still saying mainstream setting, then the judge may be able to say, do you know what, if this comes to a hearing, that's an unrealistic point of view, it's very unlikely to succeed. And vice versa, if parents are asking for something without sufficient evidence, they would say that to the parent as well. It's then the choice of the parties involved whether you accept that advice or accept the agreement that you reach in that meeting and seek a consent order, or whether you just decide, no, I'm going to press forward to a final hearing because I want a judge to take account of other things, or I feel like I want my hearing, my opportunity. It's important to know that if you have a JDAR and you carry on to a final hearing, which often happens, it will be a different judge. So they won't be prejudiced in any way, and they won't have spoken to the judge that led the JDAR, and they won't have had any paperwork to understand what happened in the JDAR. So they will make an entirely independent hearing of your case. Final preparations. So you're coming up to the hearing date. It's not hearing day yet, but you're in the last week or so before. A couple of weeks before the final hearing, you will get the bundle. It's referred to as the bundle, and it's literally if you print it out, a stack of papers. It will be all of the evidence that you've submitted, all the evidence local authority have submitted, all the emails back and forth, and that comes to you, the local authority, and the judge. It comes from the local authority. And the judge and the panel who are going to hear your case will read every single piece of paper in there. And that will be the document that you rely on to point to your evidence as well. So when you get the bundle, sit down, glass of wine, go through the bundle, mark up every page where you think there's evidence that you might want to refer to in a day. So find that educational psychologist report where it said that your child needs to work in groups of no more than 5 and put a post-it on it. Find the information from the school you want them to go to that says, yes, it would be a suitable peer group, put the post-it note on it so that you can get to that easily on the day. So you can say, I'm looking at page 79 in the bundle, and I want to draw your attention to where it says that the educational psychologist.
Is that coming hard copy now to people in the post, or is it coming by email?
It's coming by email, and it's up to you whether you mark it up electronically or whether you print it out and mark it up by hand. It just depends on how you work. So I mark them up electronically. A lot of colleagues mark them up by hand. So it's completely up to you how you do that. If you're not able to print it out for some reason, you can make the local authority aware in advance that you will need a paper copy. Okay. If you go through that bundle, and when you go through that bundle, check that all the evidence you submitted is in there, because it's not an infallible process. Often there are things that are missed out of the bundle. So double check all the evidence you expect to be there is there. And if it's not, emails to both parties straight away to say, please see attached this element of evidence which was submitted on the 1st of January but isn't included in the bundle, so that they have that. Before final preparations, before that hearing date, if you've nominated a witness, make sure that you've had a chat to them ahead of the hearing date about the value that they can bring. It's really typical if you've asked someone from the school to come along. From your point of view, they're coming along to talk about your child. It's likely that a judge or the local authority, when they have a chance to ask them a question, will ask them things like, how many children are on roll? How many children in the classroom? What's the split of boys and girls? How many other children have special educational needs? What are the behaviour management plans in the school? What are the lunchtime arrangements? They will tend to ask them the more processy things. So it's handy if the person coming along as the witness is prepared for that and knows to expect that. And certainly if you're naming an independent school and they are coming, the judge will definitely want to ask them some quite specific questions about numbers on roll and that sort of thing. And then the last thing to prepare in advance is your thoughts. So it's really easy in this process and completely understandable that you get very lost in the detail and very consumed by the dates, and there's just so many things going around. Take some time, sort of 1 to 2 days before the hearing, to sit down and go back to your reasons that you submitted the appeal in the first place. Which ones still need to have a decision made on them? And what are the main things that you want to get out of the day? Because it's usual at the beginning of a case that the judge might say, Mum or Dad, Can you give us a brief description of Johnny and why we're here today? And it's your opportunity to think, what are the main things you want them to know about your son or daughter, or that your son or daughter might want to appear and say hi, and what are the main things that you want the judge to make a decision on? So it's your opportunity to reiterate your reasons. So be ready to do that. It's not the case that in every hearing the judge does that, but it is quite common. So we are now talking about the actual hearing. So this is what will happen in the tribunal hearing. It will be an online hearing. So since COVID, everything's gone online and they haven't gone back. So unless there's a specific accessibility reason for the parent that they need to have a hearing in person, your hearing will be online. There will be one judge and 1 or 2 specialist members. Specialist members are selected and trained specifically for the tribunal. They won't have any link to Hampshire, any link to your child, or any link to the schools we're talking about, but they will usually have a background, well, they will always have background in SEN of some kind or other. Often they are expert educational psychologists or that sort of thing, speech and language therapist background. The judge and the specialist members won't be wearing a gown, they won't be wearing any wigs, they won't be sitting in a sort of high up courtroom or anything like that. They would just be on a screen like you and I are now. They'll be smartly dressed because that's the impression they want to give, but they're not there to be intimidating. The purpose of the panel and the judge is to be investigative throughout the process. So you should find them to be efficient, but not cold. You should find them to be quite direct but polite. You shouldn't at any point feel that you're under pressure or that you're told off. And if you do, you can say, I'm just need a couple of minutes break just now. I'm just feeling a little bit under pressure and I just need to go away and gather my thoughts. And you can ask for a break at any point during the hearing. So yeah, the purpose of the panel is to be investigative. So they will have gone through all of the evidence, every single piece of paper in that bundle in advance, and they will have lots of questions ready to ask, usually mostly to the local authority, and they'll want to discuss the information with you all. So it will be a very sort of discursive experience. They will be asking you, well, what's your point of view on this? And local authority, why did you think this about this? And if there's an educational psychologist there as a witness, well, I noticed that you haven't been specific. Can you be specific now, please? So it'll be a sort of very much a sort of discursive experience. So I've said they'll start by introducing themselves in the panel. They'll often give you an opportunity to outline your case, give us a brief description of Johnny and why we're here today. But sometimes they won't do that. Sometimes the judge themselves will say, so Mrs. Smith, I understand we're here today about Johnny and the main things that you want us to decide in this appeal that are still outstanding are X, Y, and Z. And don't feel that you just have to mutter yes. If that's correct, say yes. If it's not, say, and you can address the judge as ma'am or sir. Ma'am, actually, I also want to make sure that we have agreed this on this page. So the provision for his speech and language therapy also needs to be discussed because that's still outstanding. You can correct the judge, that's absolutely fine, as long as you're always polite and as long as you take your turn to talk. So everyone takes their turns to talk. You absolutely don't speak over each other and the judge acts as the chair. So as I said, the judge won't expect you to argue your case like a lawyer, but they will expect you to know why you've appealed, and they will expect you to have a view on the points that you're disputing, and they will expect you to be able to point to the evidence, which is why you're going to have marked up your bundle beforehand. The hearing will feel like a conversation, but you can't interrupt other people. And both parties can put questions to each other. So make sure you're making notes while other people are speaking about things that you disagree with or the questions that you might want to follow up on. And that can be why it's helpful to have another family member or friend attend with you. They won't be expected or particularly allowed to speak unless it's like husband and wife. If you're both there for your child, that's different. But if you've got your neighbour round to help you make notes, they wouldn't be expected to participate, but they can be really helpful in marking things down for you. If the local authority have nominated a witness, you'll know who that is in advance, and it's a good idea to think about what you might want to ask them. So if they bring, for instance, the educational psychologist, and you feel that the EP report is not detailed enough, you can say to the educational psychologist, well, you've said that James needs to have regular breaks to help him maintain his concentration. Can you please specify regular? I think because at school at the moment he has a break once every 40 minutes for 5 minutes, that would be reasonable. Would you agree? And the educational psychologist will have to say yes or no, and they'll have to provide a different suggestion if that's a no. But what we're trying to get to is some specificity that helps in your child's plan. any evidence or witness accounts that come to light, or any very late evidence that's not taken into account in the working documents, the judge might ask you to go to a breakout room to do some more work on the working documents. They might set up a breakout room in the appeal hearing. You might disappear off and sit with the local authority in that room and go through some specific points of the working document. And examples just like the one I gave of where you get the witness to give some specificity at the time can then be agreed in the working document. It's worth remembering that at the point of the hearing, the judge doesn't want to adjourn. They want to try and make decisions on the day. So any sensible amendments that are suggested are probably going to be adopted. So if we still don't have enough evidence in the plans of how many minutes of social story time Johnny needs each week, and you say, well, at the moment the school say it's once a week they do half an hour with him, the judge will say to the local authority, that sounds reasonable to me, do you have an objection? And the local authority will generally agree. So at that point you can start, but there needs to be some background to that specificity. You can't pluck it out of the air. You can say at the moment this is what he has at school, and the judge will usually accept anything that sounds sensible at that point. At the end, the judge will give both parties an opportunity to briefly state their position at the end. And if you've changed your opinion over the course of the day, or if you want to acknowledge any agreements that have been reached, that's your opportunity to do that. And then you will usually get a decision, well, you will get a decision by email within 10 working days, but sometimes where everything has been agreed in the hearing and it's very obvious what the decision is, the judge will summarise that in the hearing. But expect to hear within 10 working days, and that will come in the form of a court order. And then the local authority has to carry out the orders within specified time frame, depending on what that is. And I can drop into the chat what the specified time frames are for changes, Sarah. I'll drop that into the chat in just a moment. And that is the end of the presentation bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well, so I can see your faces if anyone's left.
There's lots of people left. I think they're still here.
Good.
They've not left. Okay.
Have I managed to stop sharing my screen yet, or am I still?
Not quite. No, I can chuck it out. I think. Hang on. I should be able to do it. Oh, I thought I did.
Stop share. It's all right.
There we go. You got it. Yeah. Couple of questions. Are there any costs involved with going through the tribunal?
So the tribunal process itself is free. You might incur some costs because it's now online, you don't have any travel costs, where you can, if there are any travel costs, claim those, but there aren't any more. If you choose to do private assessments and pay for those yourself, you can't claim those costs back. That's your own discretion to do that. But the whole point of the process is that it should be open to everyone. So if you think there's an assessment that hasn't been done, you should be seeking for the local authority to do that and using the telephone case management hearing opportunity to convince a judge to tell the local authority to do that, rather than having to pay for it.
Being part of the process has no cost unless you choose to engage professionals, be they in the law or in SEN.
Yeah.
Got ya. In terms of people coming along to the meeting, we mentioned sort of friends and neighbours. Could those people also be witnesses to act as a character reference, I suppose, for the child? You talked about how a TA could talk about how a child behaved. Could somebody who's a friend do that as well as a witness?
Not usually. It's because you've already got a parent there who can do that. So you would expect that the parent's evidence would be more robust than someone who knew the child in the same setting as the parent did. The reason that the TA can be helpful is that they know them in that educational setting and it's different. But say you are home educating and your friend is actually doing a day a week because they are, I don't know, a biology teacher in their spare time and they're doing, then that is different. But no, you don't tend to need, it's not a criminal hearing. You don't tend to need character witnesses in that sense.
What about if it was a respite carer?
Yes, that might be relevant. Yeah, definitely, to speak to behaviour, certainly. Okay. So I'm just going to have a quick mouthful of tea.
Okay, we've done a lot. In regard to evidence, I'm presuming we've got the right to all documentation, school consultation responses, etc. So all the evidence that comes in that bundle is the stuff that's gone back and forth as part of the tribunal service process, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to say but, because presumably there is other information out there in this in, when you say all, to put the question, I said all documentation, and I know there's potentially other information out there that doesn't just suddenly become available, does it?
I'm not sure where you're going. I'm happy to answer the question. I just don't fully understand it. Does the person who asked it want to ask?
So, Gordon, do you want to pop on and just explain? Don't worry if you don't. I think the question is just.
Hello.
Oh, there's Gordon.
Hi,
Gordon.
Hi. It's just basically, obviously, disputing a school placement. I don't believe that the LA has approached all the schools that we've visited.
Okay.
And so I would like to request all the school consultation responses. Have I got the right to actually get all those? Okay.
Yeah, you absolutely do. So you can request them, and if they're not forthcoming, you can ask for telephone case management hearing and explain to the judge why you feel that that's necessary for you to have them.
Even prior, can I get a hold of them prior to any appeal? I've not actually sent my appeal papers in.
Yeah, so that would be part of trying to resolve it ahead of the appeal. So yes, you can. You should be able to get those from your caseworker. If they're not forthcoming, you can also do a subject access request under the Freedom of Information Act. You're entitled to that.
Okay.
Because it might be in your case that you see those responses and think, actually, I don't have a case here, so it's not worth appealing, or actually they haven't consulted all the people I asked them to, and I absolutely do. So that can make a difference to you appealing or not. Just bear in mind that you've only got 2 months from the date of the decision letter to lodge the appeal. So if you're still going back and forth with the local authority on whether they're going to give you them or not, and you're coming up to the edge of your 2 months, put the appeal in, because you can always withdraw it later. But trying to make a late appeal is quite difficult.
Yeah, no, only received the email on Friday, so
oh, you've got 2 months.
came across this, so it was brilliant to find this.
Perfect.
Good timing.
Get cracking, Gordon.
Yeah,
based on that, that leads nicely into our next question, which is how long does it normally take from lodging an appeal till the tribunal?
Oh, how long is a piece of string? So at the moment, it depends on how busy the tribunal service is. So I would have said in Christmas, so in December, appeals that were being lodged in December were being given a hearing date of early March, but we've just got into the transfer window. So I know that sounds like football, but it's also school. So the all of the transfers from year 6 to year 7 secondary transfers, and all the infant to junior transfers came through on the 15th, tomorrow. Yeah, and then all of the transfers from secondary school to post 16 come through on the 31st of March. So loads of people will be lodging appeals around now. There will be more work, and the appeal timeframe will be pushed out. So if I say it's usually 3 to 4 months, it will be more like a big 4 months rather than a small 4 months at the moment. So it's more likely to be 16, 18 weeks, where sometimes it's only 12 weeks.
A question about places. If there were places at an independent school, but I think actually this is true of any school, when the request was made to name a school, but they are full by the time the tribunal date, what does the parent do? Do they need another backup school? What's the rules in terms of a school being named but then being full?
So it is different in terms of independent. So if this parent's asking specifically about independent, then yes, you have to have a letter from the independent school saying there is a place at this school for this child. It will cost this much, and usually they will write in the letter that they will hold the place until certain date. So you have to talk really nicely to them to hold it until 10 days after the date of the hearing, because that's when you'll get your hearing decision. If there is not a place at an independent school, the judge doesn't have any authority to name a place for a child in that school. So it's unfortunate if a place is there and then disappears before the hearing decision.
And if it's a mainstream school, the child would go in over
only sometimes,
but what about a special school?
So only sometimes, both. So maintained schools, whether they're mainstream or special, the judge and the local authority have the power to place a child in a school that is already full. But they have to take certain things into account. So the case law that they rely on is a piece of case law that says you have to show that adding one more child to the whole school roll will make a difference to all of the children in that school. So you can't just say that class 5B is full. You have to say that it will make a difference to everyone in the school. But there are now schools, particularly special schools in our county, that are so far over number on roll that they physically, the children will be sitting on the window ledges. It will make a difference to the children. So they can't the judge cannot always name that special school because it really would be unreasonable to do so. But where it's reasonable to do so, they will name, even if it takes them over role. And the local authority has that ability to do that at the point when they make the plan, should they wish to do so.
Right. Excuse me. If my child has been given a final EHCP which has the current mainstream school named on it, however, it is agreed by both the caseworker and the current school that that school can't meet need, do I need to go to appeal to get that removed?
If your decision is in the last 2 months, then yes, you do need to do that. I would go back to the very beginning of the slides and say, speak to your caseworker, speak to the school, see if you can get everyone into a room and resolve it. You make use, in this case, make use of the mediation process, because it can be really helpful, because you can invite school to the mediation meeting to say why they think they can't meet needs, and you will, either the local authority will change their mind, probably not enormously likely in the mediation meeting, but they will absolutely say why they're placing it at that school, and the school can say exactly why they feel it's inappropriate, and it gives you basically everything you need to write in those boxes on your appeal form. And then yes, appeal is the route to get a judge to overturn that decision.
And if that's an EHCP that's a little bit older and that it has become apparent in the subsequent amount of time that the setting is not appropriate, is that through annual review instead?
Yes, so if you haven't had a decision that you can appeal within the last 2 months, you need to request an annual review. Annual reviews have to be made within 1 year since the last annual review, or within 1 year since the plan was made. So it doesn't have to be exactly 1 year after. So we do sometimes have schools saying, well, you can't have an annual review. It's only been 9 months, or it's only been 6 months. It has to be made within the year, so you can do an early annual review, or what they will sometimes call an emergency annual review, if the placement is breaking down or if it's really not working for the child. If you are seeking an emergency or an early annual review for a change of placement, you should also let your caseworker know and make sure they're invited to that meeting.
Super, thank you. I've just made a note to ask if you know how many tribunals are settled before it actually sort of goes to, well, it's not to court anymore, to whatever.
to the computer screen.
To the computer screen.
I don't, off the top of my head, I could find that out. I know that I'm going to give you the wrong percentage, but an overwhelming percentage of decisions are made in favour of the appellant, so the parent, and that includes those settled ahead of time.
I think it's just one of those things. It's nice to set a picture for parents. Yes. You know, this is a not pleasant process. I've been through it twice. Yes. In both the cases, we didn't get to the date of the hearing, and in both cases, it was agreed to provide the thing that we were challenging. So it's not a nice process, but if you've got all your evidence, then
a huge number are resolved ahead. And the reason I'm hesitating on the number is because now that we have the TCMH, the telephone case management hearing, and the JDAR, the judicial alternative dispute resolution, there are 2 more ways where a third party can help the local authority make that the right decision in the parent's eyes ahead of the meeting date. So there are more being resolved than there used to be, even more than there used to be.
They sound like ways to unblock the impasse.
They are, yeah.
Which is often, you know, it's that impasse that sort of, you know. Okay, I think we have covered all our questions. Oh, hang on. Back to the bottom. Who promotes a placement? School or LA? Gordon, you might want to just tell us what you mean. I think what you're asking is who decides ultimately on the school, but just tell us what you mean, Gordon.
Yeah, sorry, I had to catch you in a short time. No, basically,
you'd have had a moment.
So basically, on Friday we received an email stipulating a placement. Now, even the prison school has come back to us and said they are confused and surprised in their placement. Isn't it the school that's actually telling the LA that these individuals should go to XYZ school? Or is LA just reading section B and saying everybody can read section B in a different way?
Yeah, so the local authority is responsible for naming the school. if your child had an annual review and the current school said we can't meet need anymore and we think the sort of setting that might work is X, Y, or Z, then they can do that. But that's unusual. In most cases, the current school would say, no, we can't meet need. We think a special setting is needed, or we think a smaller setting is needed. And then yourself and the local authority you would be saying to the local authority, we want this school over here, and they would be consulting the school that you want and any other schools they think might meet needs.
Yeah, so he's basically moving on to secondary school. So
okay,
that's so he's in special needs school.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking for another secondary school. Visited about 10 schools, and at the end they said none of them are viable for placement.
Gail, do you just want to tell us about that list that I can't remember the name of, that lists all schools that Gordon could look at for his son? There's a list, Gordon, that shows you all the schools, both maintained and non-maintained, that the local authority would look at. It's quite comprehensive, and it often comes up with stuff that you're not aware of, because they're quite specialised settings. Gail's obviously digging in the
bookshelf. Right.
That's the one.
Hang on, it's blurred. If I put it on my face, can you see it? No, let me take my blur off. Hang on. Unblur myself. A minute.
I think the school did provide me with a list of schools, and that's where we worked off. We even went independent route. Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that now. I know, Gordon, it's available online as well, and it might be that we can't find the link for you right now, but we'll find it. I put all the links from our meetings up on my HPCN group, which is HPCN Hart and Rushmore. Even if you're not in Hart and Rushmore, feel free to join and pick bits off it. I'm fairly sure we've got a link to it somewhere.
Okay, and the last question is, tomorrow you got another Tuesday.
Yeah, we've got parent-led engagement session tomorrow. Yeah.
What is that all about? Sorry.
Really, it's doing what you're doing now.
Okay.
But but that parents can come along and they can ask any question about any subject which might move forward a situation for their child or young person. Gail will probably be there. I might be there, depending on my current COVID status. So we'll see. But there's usually representatives from SENDIASS there and representatives from the local authority there. And what we're trying to do again is unblock that impasse. If you're stuck in a situation and we can provide some advice for you to move a situation forward, that's what we're attempting to do.
Brilliant. I appreciate this. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That's fine. Does anyone else want to unmute and ask a question? Because I can imagine that if you've thought of one at the last minute, you're desperately typing and deleting.